Good afternoon. I'd like to welcome you to this afternoon's webinar entitled The Apprenticeships Levy, the New Funding Rules and Eligibility Criteria Explained. Today's webinar is hosted by Arch Apprentices in association with techUK. My name is Tim Flagg and I'm going to be the host for this afternoon's webinar. We've got a great panel of speakers who'll be sharing their insights from business and industry, as well as delivering apprenticeships. And then at the end of today's session, we'll also have a Q&A when I'll be inviting you, our audience, to send in your questions and participate with any of the questions you have about how specifically the apprenticeship levy might work in your organisation. The entire webinar will last about an hour, and you'll hear a number of speakers first, and then we'll come back to the Q&A session. So let me quickly introduce you to today's panel. We have three speakers. First up, we have Doniya Soni, who is the Policy Manager for Skills, Talent and Diversity at techUK. And I'm going to be really interested to hear Doniya's perspective, being able to share the insights representing employers and the tech industry at large. We'll also then hear from Jason Moss, who's the CEO of Arch Apprentices. Jason will be able to clarify in a lot more detail exactly what the government's latest document means and elaborate on those points and how they will impact employers. We'll also then hear from John Pritchard, who is the Director of Learning and Development at Arch Apprentices. And John has a lot of experience of establishing the frameworks and seeing these qualifications, apprenticeship qualifications implemented. So John will be able to bring that alive for us as well. We'll then end with a question and answer session when I invite you, our audience, to be able to bring your questions on how the apprenticeship levy will affect your particular organisation and your circumstances. Put those questions to our audience, who should be able to clarify as much as possible. So I'm delighted to announce our first speaker today is Doniya Soni. Doniya is the Policy Manager for Skills, Talent and Diversity at techUK, and has been very much a voice on these panels, bringing the insights from the industry and allowing us to get a perspective from businesses. So without further ado, over to you, Doniya.
Thanks, Tim, very much. As you mentioned, I'm the Policy Manager for Skills, Talent and Diversity here at techUK. If you're unaware of what techUK does, techUK is the industry body representing the voice of the tech sector in the UK. We have about 900 members ranging from one-man bands to FTSE 100 companies, and collectively they employ 700,000 people. So that's about half of all the tech sector jobs in the UK. As many of you on the webinar will be aware, the tech sector faces a significant digital skills gap. This is a pressing issue for our members, as there are a number of jobs within the sector and within their organization waiting to be filled, but not enough domestic talent to fill them. There's some good news on that front with the recent A-level and GCSE results and increased uptake in computer science qualifications. However, there's definitely still more to be done, especially in terms of diversity, as there's not nearly enough girls taking STEM subjects, and not enough BAME representation within these subjects. Part of the government's approach to address this skills gap was to create the Apprenticeship Levy, and this Apprenticeship Levy was to address and for companies to start investing in domestic skills, not just in the tech sector, but across every sector that has a wage gap of more than £3 million. Although the levy still poses a number of challenges for tech companies, there are some significant developments that came out in the guidance documents on 12th August that we welcome. So these developments address some of the key concerns that techUK members had and techUK members wanted more clarity on. So for instance, since the announcement of the levy in July 2015, techUK has been making a series of recommendations to government, ministers and officials. We can see some development on the recommendations we have made, including focus on higher level apprenticeships with STEM subjects receiving an uplift in funding. Also, proposals on reskilling existing employees is a welcome development and gives organizations an opportunity to invest within their reskilling programs and help people who have not worked in tech reskill into tech. Finally, the proposals allowed companies to be given the opportunity to feed their levy funds into their supply chain, more specifically 10% by 2018. This is again a welcome development and something this sector is keen to do to help develop the skills in their local community and their local ecosystem. However, tech companies are hoping to be able to transfer more than 10% into their supply chains in order to help develop their supply chains. There are still some questions to be answered, including the makeup of the Institute for Apprenticeships and whether or not digital skills will be at the core of each apprenticeship standard. So we're looking forward to getting more information on that in the forthcoming guidance documents in October. There is some great news with the recent A level and GCSE results, and we saw an increased uptake in computer science qualifications across both levels. However, there's definitely still more to be done. There's still not nearly enough diversity in STEM subjects, especially as there was only 9.2% of girls studying A level in computing. However, we did see the number of girls doubling who took computing GCSE. So there is some progress, but again, definitely more to be done. I look forward to going through all of the developments with the panel today and hope our members and non-members alike find this session beneficial.
So thanks very much, Doniya. That's been great to hear your perspective, really representing the industry and businesses and what they can hope to get and learn from this recent report that's now come out clarifying a number of issues. Now I'd like to introduce Jason Moss. Jason is the CEO of Arch Apprentices and will be able to bring to life some of those insights from the report, but also give a bit of a perspective from a training provider that's actually been delivering apprenticeships over the last couple of years. So Jason, over to you.
Oh, thank you, Tim. So yes, quick intro to myself and Arch. So as Tim said, Jason Moss, Chief Exec of Arch Apprentices. Arch is part of the Blenheim Chalcott Group, around 26 businesses employing around 3,500 people, effectively needing a lot of people in the digital and IT sectors. And I guess 5 years ago almost now had a choice. Do we go and work with another college or training provider, or do we look to set up our own business to create our own apprentices? So that's really the history of Arch. We started the program initially to service the 26 businesses that we belong to. But over our journey over the past 5 years, have also worked now with around 350 employers, around 1,200 apprentices in total. Probably around 300 of those are in the group. The other 900 are with those external employers we work with. Some examples of which are the likes of Google, John Lewis, and Facebook, and Barclays, and Lloyd's, and so on, as well as a couple of hundred SMEs as well. So that's a little bit of a background on Arch and where we're coming from. We've been working with a number of those employers now to discuss the apprenticeship levy with them. So if we look at what has effectively happened with the apprenticeship levy, I guess the recent announcements we'll come on to in just a moment, but just before we do that, a quick recap of what it is that the levy is all about. So the levy is a brand new government hypothecated tax, starts in April of next year, April the 6th of 2017. The way it's calculated is that it's 0.5% of an employer's UK payroll. That payroll effectively is looked at containing things like bonuses, commission pay, etc., are all taken into account for the UK. 0.5% of that is calculated and will be deducted each month from the HMRC and will pay into a digital apprenticeship service or an account that is set up in the company's name, where the money will be ring fenced and utilized for essentially paying for apprenticeships. So there's some top-ups, there's some incentives we'll come on to in just a moment. The first one, I guess, is a 10% top-up for your English portion of your levy. So as part of your pay bill, whatever you pay in, if you look at the English portion of that pay bill, 10% in addition will be topped up by government as an additional incentive to work with apprentices. As I've mentioned, that all goes into your digital account each month on either the 19th or the 22nd, and will be used then to fund apprenticeship training, apprenticeships, whether that's frameworks or whether that's apprenticeship standards. But key thing is that they have to be with an approved apprenticeship provider and can't be just something that you've done sort of internally, I guess. So funds have an expiry date that's been reconfirmed in the updates I'll go through in just a moment. And I guess really what we've been waiting for are these latest announcements. They were expected and anticipated to be in June, but they actually were released on the 12th of August in 2016. So some of the things that were released in that announcement, the first one is a very slight delay to the implementation. It was going to be that all apprenticeship starts from the 1st of April would be funded via the levy, but in fact it will now be all apprenticeship starts from the 1st of May. So any apprentices starting during April will be on the current funding system rather than the new one. So that's one of the changes. A little bit of a gotcha here, though. Some employers are looking at that and thinking, okay, so if I don't pay until the 19th or 22nd of May, that in fact that's looking at May's payroll, and that's a mistake. In May, when the calculation is made, it'll be calculated based on whatever your April pay bill was, and therefore, if April was a month where perhaps you paid bonuses or incentives to staff, they will naturally come under the scope of the levy, and you'll pay the tax on those too. I mentioned that there are essentially funding bands which are associated with apprenticeship. So in England, any apprenticeship standard or framework is mapped to a particular funding band, which essentially sets the price that the apprenticeship is set at. Again, one of the announcements was an increase from the current 6 bands that exist to a new essentially 15 funding bands. First funding band, the lowest apprenticeship is starting at £1,500, and the largest funding band is at 27,000. And there's those 15 bands effectively, and all standards and frameworks are mapped into one of those. What's actually happened is the government has published in August as well sort of a provisional banding for every framework or standard that exists, and employers had up until the 5th of September to respond to that and perhaps challenge if they thought something had been placed into the incorrect band, and essentially that's looking to sort of challenge where they've been placed. And in October, one of the announcements that will be confirmed is where these apprenticeship standards and frameworks have sort of finally sat. So again, one of the changes is there's a single band regardless of age of the learner or geographical location. The way it works at the moment is if someone's under 19, there's a certain price. If they're over 19, the price is different. And also the certain geographies in England, they have an uplift based on the particular area that the learner lives. Those things have both been taken away. It's been simplified. It's a single band regardless of age or geography. One of the new elements that came out and was released in the announcement was co-investment. We knew this would happen. What if you're a non-levy payer? Or what happens if you're a levy payer but have spent what is in your account, but you'd like to do more than your levy allows you to? And the government have announced something called co-investment. And the way that works is effectively, as an employer, you pay 10% of the costs, 1/10. The government will pay the remaining 90% of those costs. And again, that's a real kind of difference to the way it works today. And clearly the government looking to incentivize employers to do more than the levy allows them to, or to really make sure, I guess, that non-levy payers are still doing their bit when it comes to apprenticeships. If you're an SME, there are some other incentives. So if you're an SME, which is someone with less or fewer than 50 employees, if you employed someone who was 16 to 18 as an apprentice, you wouldn't have to co-invest at all. The government pays 100% of those costs. Further incentives for employers, regardless of their size, are also around 16 to 18-year-olds. The government has realised that perhaps people under 19 require a little more support, perhaps a little bit more effort to work with them. They've got a little less life experience and work experience, perhaps. So for any employer, regardless of size, if they employ apprentices between 16 and 18 years old, there'll be a £1,000 incentive for doing so, paid in 2 instalments, £500 at the end of the 3rd month and £500 at the end of the 12th month. Vouchers will expire. So vouchers have an 18-month expiry date on them. So it comes on a first in, first out basis. So whatever you pay in May of 2017, 18 months later, if you haven't spent that particular month's payment, it will be taken away, it will be lost. and therefore clearly employers need to be managing their account effectively to make sure that that doesn't happen. Funding and eligibility, a real big one that everyone was waiting for in August. Who is it we can use to spend this money on? And effectively what's been announced is that can be your existing employees as well as new hires. It can include university graduates as well, which is new to the system. That wasn't previously allowed. But there's a little caveat to that, which I'll come on to now, which is around effectively an employee, an apprentice, should be undertaking something that is a higher level than a qualification that they already hold. If you want them to do something at the same level as a qualification they already have, or at a lower level, then the key statement that the government are using is that it should be to acquire substantive new skills. So if I just briefly give an example, in our sector, if I held a computer science degree, which is level 6, but then wanted to complete a level 3 or level 4 IT apprenticeship, that's a lower level than what I currently hold at my degree level, but I wouldn't have thought that would contain substantive new skills from what I have already learned in my computer science degree. So I would think that in this case, it probably wouldn't be allowed as part of the levy to be funded. Whereas for my digital marketing frameworks and standards that I work with, we have a lot of people who have studied history or classics or philosophy at university, now want to work in digital. Clearly, it's a lower level, level 3, level 4 framework or standard they're going to complete, but you could justify that they were substantive new skills being learned compared to the philosophy degree that they did at university. And therefore, in that case, this would be eligible for levy and for funding. So quite a big on that one, quite a key one for many of our employers, one that a lot of people were looking at for, particularly in my sector of digital and IT, a lot of people already have a degree of some kind, and therefore this was quite a big one for us. If we look next at supply chain, one of the new announcements on August the 12th was that from 2018, so once the levy's been running for around 12 months, an employer will be allowed to transfer up to 10% of their underspent levy and transfer that into another levy paying account. And therefore, really the reason for this is around supply chain. Perhaps you have a large employer who realizes that they won't spend all of their levy allocation and will naturally want to, rather than just lose it, perhaps have some choice and decision in who that underspent levy is transferred to. More to come on that, I think, later this year. The 2018 is up for consultation, as is the 10% figure. That may change, but at the moment, as it stands, that's what we're working towards. And as I mentioned, that final thing there is around further announcements in October and December of this year. The final funding bands will be released, the full set of technical rules, and further confirmation and guidance on how the levy will be calculated and paid each month will all be in those two announcements. So clearly 2 things we need to really look out for.
That's great. Thank you, Jason. That's been a very comprehensive overview of what's been announced in this latest proposal document from the government. One of the challenges that we know has been faced by employers is being able to understand exactly who will be able to take advantage of the levy funds and whether they'll be available for all ages. Is that something which you feel has been clarified now by this document?
I do, yeah, absolutely. When you look at the way the funding has been calculated, one of the changes, effectively at the moment, the way apprenticeships are funded is if you're 16 to 18, they're funded one way. If you're over 19, they're funded slightly differently. If it's an apprenticeship standard rather than a framework, it's slightly different again. But really what they're trying to do in this now is simplify it. And really, regardless of age, regardless of geography, actually the same funding rates will apply. And the key really is that substantive new skills. If you've got an existing member of your team, if they're learning something new to fulfill the role that they're performing for you, then it's absolutely fine to put them on an apprenticeship, regardless of age.
And is there also a sense of relief after this document has come out that there aren't going to be too bigger changes now? I mean, we've seen in other areas of the government policy with the new May administration coming in, there have been some quite sizable changes in reverse of the policy. Was there that sort of fear that that might have happened to the apprenticeship levy, and has it been dispelled?
Yeah, I mean, I can answer, and maybe the others can comment too, but certainly the employers I was speaking with, there was maybe lots of people thinking, would there be delays? Actually, would the levy happen at all? Would it be delayed, for perhaps 12 months? Especially with, what happened with Brexit and then the change in government, change in skills minister and obviously Prime Minister. But effectively, as we've seen, I think by getting this document out, I think perhaps all of those questions now have been answered. There are one or two sort of more technical details within it of how it's going to work that still need clarification. But I think by making the statement that's been made, I don't see any reason now why it wouldn't sort of go ahead as planned.
Yeah, great. And Doniya, did you have a perspective on that as well?
Well, the tech sector originally did call for a delay on the levy due to the delay in the guidance documents coming out, especially because that would leave for a shorter time on consultation, and a lot of companies do believe that the current time period for consultation is quite short, especially for the period of August. However, I think the employers that I work with are being quite pragmatic about the situation, understanding that yes, that's the case, the documents are out, there's no delay, so how do we work and consult and make sure that the questions that the government has posed to employers, that we answer to the best of our ability and make sure that the opinions and the feedback from the sector is heard on the funding bans, on the diversion of funds and the reskilling. There's still some questions that employers have on the new proposed employer-provider route. I think that could do with some more clarification as well. But overall, I mean, I think, like I said, pragmatic. We're going to take things as they come, understand that there won't be a delay. So how do we make this work to the best of our ability? That's the kind of mood that I've been sensing.
John Pritchard is the Director of Learning and Development at Arch Apprentices. So, John, it's a pleasure to have you, as ever. Over to you.
Thanks, Tim. Good afternoon, everybody. So, I think, as Jason's already mentioned, the big thing in terms of the funding bands is that we've gone from 6 now to 15. And the range of those funding bands goes from £1,500 up to £27,000. So, a significant difference from where we've been before. Fortunately, from what we've seen so far and what's been published, with the standards that have been created in the frameworks, the digital and the IT are in the higher bands, and so it doesn't affect us with the lower bands from approximately 1,500 up to 8,000. What is significant change in terms of the funding and in terms of the bands is that this is all aligned to both frameworks and standards now. So where a framework at the moment is currently delivered under one pricing structure, as Jason mentioned, and the standards under another, this now should make it and simplify it for everybody going forward. What you have got is the same funding for everybody across the sectors. I think the other thing that realistically that was announced in the paper was the uplift against the STEM subjects, so 40% for level 2 and 80% for level 3. And there is still an opportunity for everybody to submit any concerns they have back to BIS by and the SFA by the beginning of September. We've already had concerns from employers that have been raised already around the digital marketer level 3, which sits in band 9 at £9,000, and another one that we've had feedback on currently against a new standard is the reduction from £27,000 of the data analytics at level 4 down to £15,000. So there's certainly feedback going into there. Two that don't necessarily have current standards at the moment, but again are utilised very heavily is the creative and digital media apprenticeships in the framework that have been put into the lower bands of £2,500 and £4,000, which seems a bit low when they're currently delivered around £11,000 for those two frameworks. So as employers, everybody has the opportunity to feed back and under the consultation to whether they do it through their providers, whether they do it through techUK or they do it individually, you have the opportunity to feedback and voice any concerns you have about the funding that has been allocated against those bands. What it does indicate quite clearly is all of the level 6 and the degree apprenticeships have stayed in band 15 and are at £27,000. And majority of those that were in that band as level 4s have been moved down to 24s and £15,000 average. We believe that there was nothing that we weren't or that was new to us. We were expecting the majority of those things. I think that, as Jason said, there are some bits that underpin this, that as providers and having conversations with the employers is getting some clarity now around what the additional costs that sit within that for endpoint assessment and how that affects the spend of the money that you have against the voucher of 18,000, if you like. If an endpoint assessment is reduced, that reduces the money you have. But what it won't do is affect what you pay in the voucher cost, and therefore where we've had conversations with employers already that the previous funding bands are up to 6, they were all at 27,000, that reduced the number of apprenticeships that you would have to do to spend that money. Being lowered now in some of the bands, that will mean there's probably more potential training that you can do and more people can be advantaged on the training and take the opportunities, as opposed to spend at higher rates where you can get more people to do that training. So we know that working with some of the employers, we've had that conversation that might equate to 10 or 20 or 30 apprenticeships. Actually, that might be doubled now if some of those apprenticeships are at a lower band than was previously forecast. I think it's also bear in mind that although these standards are allocated to bands, there are still new standards being developed. There are still standards that will need to be added to these bands as they come out. And likewise, over the period, there will be frameworks that will be removed from current use and retired as these new standards come out. So I think that there's two messages potentially. The first one is, if anybody wishes to feedback about where they believe they've had current provision already and that value has gone down, is not going to give them the full capacity to get the maximum benefit of the training, that they can feed back into that. And I think the second one is the opportunity where some have been lowered, that gives you more training and skills that you can invest in. So that's where we've got to with the standards as we are, Tim. There are 15 bands, which I think has cleared a lot of the confusion up, and the conversations, as Jason was saying, where people were talking about 6 or 10 or 15 bands. We know there'll be 15. That's not going to change. What will or might change is some of those that people can test and feed back into.
Okay, we've got a question here from Alan Mead. Could you please better explain supply chain in terms of funds transfer? Maybe that's one to start with, John.
So this is where if you take the likes of a large corporate, isn't going to increase their headcount on new apprenticeships, can't spend all of their levy on current or existing staff, but have a very good supply chain and network that they work with, that they would like those people to be upskilled maybe on their products or on the services that they offer. This could be then used for those people to be skilled at the same level or even on the products that corporate employer is offering. And that will allow those people who don't pay the levy necessarily or need the training to use that from the corporate, and likewise the corporate who doesn't want to just give the money away as a tax to be able to utilise that to skill other workforce or their supply chain to enhance the skills gaps that they've got in their company.
Additionally, the documents say that you can transfer, well, the proposed is transferring up to 10% to anybody, any organisation that has a digital apprenticeship system account. So they don't necessarily have to be in your supply chain. I've got a few members who are considering transferring their funds to the local schools in their area so they can train teachers more effectively in careers development, as well as help train computer science teachers. So I think it's anybody with a digital apprenticeship system account, and organizations can, help develop the skills in their local ecosystems.
I think, can I just add too? I think it's, when I've been talking with employers, we know that there's an 18-month expiry date on the vouchers. So if I was an employer and a several £1 million levy bill, and as John said, I've utilised what I can internally on my existing workforce. I've recruited new people into my team and upskilled and trained them too. But perhaps I've got some left over that I know I'm going to lose. I guess I have two choices. I can either just lose it at the end of 18 months and allow the government to reapportion it somewhere else, or I can have some kind of selection and choice in how it's spent, which is, I guess, what Doniya's just been saying with regards to, actually I would like it to go to this particular organisation or this particular school in my local area, or within my supply chain.
Yeah.
So rather than just letting the government perhaps reassign, just having some kind of choice over what happens to your unspent levy.
Yeah, definitely.
Great, thank you. The question, I think, which came in earlier, where can one find a list of the full, sorry, I can't actually going to read that word, but standards, thank you, full standards with their respective funding rounds. I need to get some new glasses. Maybe, Jason, would you like to kick off with that one so I go get some new glasses?
I think we'll include a link in the slides, perhaps, where there's a government area which you can go to on the SFA website, which actually publishes a list of all the current approved standards, and also talks to you about what standards are in development as well. And there's a link that we have to that. If I tried to give you that now, that'd be very difficult. So perhaps, so perhaps if we put that within the documents that will go out, then everyone can have that and can see them. John, is there anything?
Yeah, no. Well, there's that link, I think, and there's also a tool that was issued with the guidance document that's basically a spreadsheet, and you can type the title of the framework or standard that you're looking for into that spreadsheet, and it will bring that up and give you the relevant funding bands for each of the levels. So I think if we put both of those in there as the link, then that gives everyone the opportunity to have a look at it.
Okay.
I think the bonus with the one Jason's referred to is that also gives you the link to standards that are in development, as well as those that are live, but what that won't do is tell you which funding band they're in yet until they've been fully developed and approved.
Great, thank you. I see questions come in about who can do an apprenticeship. I think we covered this one before, but maybe due to the sound quality it wasn't very clear. Who is covered and who can we use the apprenticeship levy funding for within an organisation? There's been some questions about age, about degree status. Jason, do you want to cover that one?
Yeah. So with regards to age, then as we mentioned, there is no age restriction. So anyone, regardless of age or geography, can do it. Clearly, if I think about devolved regions for a moment, then there's a slight complication there with regards to where they work. But also then with regards to people who are graduates and have degrees already, provided they are doing a role that requires substantive new training in order to be able to deliver that role successfully, then they will also be eligible for an apprenticeship. And that was one of the key changes. People previously who were graduates weren't funded under the current system. Obviously, clearly will be funded under the new system, provided they're doing something new that requires new training and new skills to develop to be able to perform the role well.
Great, thank you. And John?
Well, I think not just in graduates, there's people that are coming out of college or people who have been in training before that might equate to a level 3 or level 4 qualification that prevented those from doing an apprenticeship before. So those people, again, as long as they are doing something at a higher level, or, as Jason has said, that they're doing something that is substantively new skills, then they will still be able to do the apprenticeship. So it doesn't just affect our graduates, it's people who have done previous apprenticeships or previous qualifications. What they've done by this statement is enabled everybody now to be upskilled where they need to be, or in the ever-changing world of digital and IT, where different roles have come out and they need to retrain, they will still be able to do that.
We've been speaking to our members and encouraging them to think about how they can use their levy funds to not just reskill their existing employees in new skills that they may not have, but also create schemes for women returners or army veterans who are looking to reskill into the tech sector. Like I said, there's a skills gap. There's a lot of women returners who would like to enter into the tech sector, and this might provide them with some great training opportunities to do so. Same with army veterans. There's a couple of organisations that are looking into that.
Great. So the government has actually now made this a lot more open, and that means that there's a lot more opportunity for organisations to use this across the full L&D gamut. Really, it's not just limited.
Basically, anyone can be an apprentice. And we could all be apprentices if we were all learning something materially different.
Which in some way makes sense. I mean, I think I remember last time you saying that actually in the tech sector there are a lot of apprentices, and that's not official but unofficial. That's just the way you learn about digital, and in the way that you put it there, everyone is an apprentice. It makes sense.
You can be,
I was at a conference recently, and one of the questions that was posed to the SFA at the time was, when the government was paying, perhaps they could put some kind of constraints around who could be an apprentice and who couldn't. But actually, with levy-paying customers, if it's an employer paying money into a particular pot, they should be able to decide who and what they train their workforce
and in what. Yeah, exactly. Makes sense.
So,
right.
And I think we've said this on previous ones, but I think it's really important that you do look at what that skill is required in the upskilling, and there's a pathway, if we refer to it in that way, that this is the levy continues. So spending it all in one go isn't necessarily going to benefit everybody. Building in a structured upskilling and development program, whether we talk about levels from 3, 4 to 6, or whether we talk about management positions or opportunities within the company, and link that to the training, it will give that continuous learning, and someone will be able to benefit from the system now and use that money against that training and upskilling as they go.
Great. I think that's key for retention, isn't it? If you think about retention of your current workforce and your new hires you're bringing into the business, if there's a structured plan over multiple years with multiple apprenticeship frameworks or standards mapped against that, number one, you're clearly looking to retain your people for a long time and develop them, and number two, you're obviously using your levy multiple times on that same individual as they develop through the different levels that are available.
Absolutely, yeah. Just conscious we've got quite a few more questions coming in, so thank you everyone who's put the questions into the box. I'm going to try and get through a couple. Question from Mark Stewart. He said, what are the mechanics for transferring 10% of vouchers to your supply chain post-2018? And also I see there's another question which is quite specific from Mark, which I'd like to sort of also bring in, which is, if our programme costs $42,000, then I will have to pay an additional top-up, even though I may still have funds in my digital account. Correct? Question mark. So maybe, John, can I get you to talk about the top-up, first of all, and then maybe get Jason to pick up on the 10% vouchers? Does that work?
Yeah. Shall I just do the 10%? I mean, the 10% vouchers, actually, we're still waiting for information on that. So the document literally said that we'll be able to do it from 2018, but it doesn't talk about any of the mechanics about how that's going to work. So actually we can't answer that question at the moment. That's something that we need to wait for, in either the October or the December guidance that's going to come out.
Right. And that's up for consultation as well. So if you believe that the funds should be 5%, 20, 50, etc., make your opinions known, make them heard. It depends on if you've done the calculations and you understand that you can only use 60% of your funds, and you believe that 40% of the funds could benefit another organisation within your area, then definitely voice that opinion, because that 10% is a number that's up for consultation at the moment.
Great, thank you. And John, in terms of the top-up?
Well, I think that the other side of it, if £42,000 for an apprenticeship, obviously is well and truly over the top limit of 27,000. But there's two sides to this for me. The first one is all that training relevant to the apprenticeship, and is it a progression that fits in there? Is it one complete apprenticeship, or is it a development over a period of time? Because investing that type of money probably isn't a 12, 18 month or 24 apprenticeship. So that's not to say that isn't the case. But if they've spent the money, their full amount of the voucher, then there is the opportunity to do this top up, and there is the opportunity for them to still buy external training over and above the apprenticeship that they have, where they won't be able to use the voucher in that. So
I'm under the impression that if you spend more than the funding band, then the government will co-invest.
This is the top-up or the co-investment, but
you have to be very careful on that one, because if you want to spend more, if that 42,000 is one individual apprentice, that's different from if that 42,000 is 3 apprentices at £14,000 each. So we're just going to be a little bit careful of how we answer that one, I guess. So if we were talking about one apprentice, which I think where John was going, who was being spent £42,000 on, if that was in a band that was at 27,000, 27,000 could come from your levy payment. Yeah. The additional 15,000 you would have to pay directly to your training provider, that £15,000.
Right.
In the future, the Digital Apprenticeship Service will have the ability to be able to top up that extra 15,000 through the digital service, but you still have to pay yourselves because the cap set by government would have been 27. Yeah. If it was 3 different apprentices at 14,000 each, it's a different answer, because if you then want to recruit more people, but your levy payment is only 42,000, but you want to recruit more apprentices than your levy allows you to, that's the co-investment, 90% government, 10% employer.
So, I mean, there's these guidelines which have been published by the government, which are aimed to give the general worked example of how it might look. Obviously, a lot of our audience will have specific examples like Mark, where they say, look, we've got this number of apprentices, this number. How can they best get advice and guidance? Is there someone at Arch they could speak to maybe look at their case in more detail? Because it feels like they need more personalised, more customised service.
Yeah, absolutely. And in our document there, both my details and John's details are within the document. We'll be happy to set up a call, perhaps even meet in person if needed, and help talk through some of these things. So absolutely.
Okay. And I think it'd be a much better way for them to be able to understand how their own individual company circumstances might then benefit from the apprenticeship levy. Yeah. Great, okay. A good question here from Kirsten Booth. Would you know in relation to agency workers whether agencies will pass on the levy charge in the rate they charge? And if they do, how would companies access the digital credits? How do you think this will work? Again, quite a specific case there. Jason, do you want to just come back into that one quickly?
I think we're going to have to take that one away, Tim.
It's quite specific, isn't it?
It was, and I did have a customer recently who was talking about this specific issue where perhaps as the agency, they're on their payroll, and therefore, clearly, if they're on their payroll, they're part of their 0.5% payment into the levy pot, and how would they recover it? And they'd been specifically asking the government that question and hadn't got the response that they were looking for. And therefore, at the moment, I don't think that question is being fully answered.
Yeah.
So maybe one we have to take away.
Best for that question. A couple of questions which I think we might have covered, but I just wonder whether we just do some quick fire answers to these and then we'll go to some other longer ones. Sandy Burrs asked, does this system only go towards new apprenticeships not yet started? I think we've covered that one.
Yeah, so it has to be any new apprenticeship started from the 1st of May. So any apprentice that starts between now and the 1st of May would work on the current funding system for the life of their apprenticeship. So you could get an apprentice starting April 2017 on an 18-month programme. For that whole 18 months, they will be using the current funding system.
And they wouldn't be able to draw from their levy funds to train that apprentice. They will have only apprentices starting from the 1st of May will be able to be funded by the levy.
Exactly.
And maybe a question for John. A little bit of open-ended question from Karen Hayes. What guidance would you give to organisations starting to consider an apprenticeship programme?
I think, as we've said before, is if they've not done an apprenticeship programme before, is first either speak to other employers that they know who have, or speak to a recommended provider. Look at the standards. They need to map what their current training is that they're doing internally. Can that fit into an existing standard? If it doesn't, then that can't be used as part of the apprenticeship that they want to invest in. So what standards exist? What standards are in development that they could possibly use going forward? But speak to someone who is credible, who's been recommended to them, or who they know is a preferred provider, and get the information, sit down with them and explain what they fully want.
Great. And just to bring in a question now, slightly sort of thorny issue about devolution. So, question from Mark Stewart. Mark, you're doing very well in asking lots of questions there. Well done. How do we ensure devolved nations are aligned and we don't end up with 3 or 4 different approaches? Bit of a technical one there. John, you look like you wanted to answer that question.
I can come in and save John there. There's no way that we can make sure of anything like that. But we do know the Scottish Government is consulting on the issue at the moment. They've got a consultation out specifically on the Apprenticeship Levy and their apprenticeship system and how they can make it work with the new guidelines. So I would recommend that if you've got any thoughts or opinions on that, definitely submit to that consultation. And the same goes to, we've asked that question before to officials and government, how do we make sure this is aligned? And they say, the same way that you let us know your opinions, lay out some recommendations, speak to your trade associations such as techUK, or speak to other tech companies or other companies that are within your area and see what your problems are, and get together and create a response to one of these consultations, and then hopefully they can. That will only go so far, but that's the best way to make your thoughts heard on this specific issue at the moment.
One of the things that was clarified in the document, at the moment it's a little bit unclear with regards to current system, or how do we know where an apprenticeship falls? Does it fall in England or in Scotland? But actually in the new guidance on the 12th of August that was clarified, and it's all about the employees' postcode of where they work. So you might end up with a scenario where, we work in Bristol, for instance. We have a learner who lives in South Wales, but actually is employed and works within Bristol. If that's their main place of work where they travel to every day, they'll be funded using the English levy system. It's their place of work, not actually where they live. And that was clarified on the 12th of August, which is different to how it works at the moment.
Yeah, great.
I think the other thing is to bear in mind that the standards that have been brought out now to replace the frameworks don't necessarily mean to say that they're better or higher levels in all cases for the current frameworks that are there. And in a lot of cases, some of the employers didn't want to change the standards. They were happy with the framework that existed. I think the big thing for me is that the employers, to make this at the same level, is don't be dictated to by the provider of what units or what you have to do in that apprenticeship. Have a say the same as you have a say now in the standards of what you want to be trained and what you want to be delivered. And that way you've got some equality there in what's being delivered across each of the areas. And you can have someone who's in Scotland or Wales and a company in England. They could be doing a standard and a framework, but if you're aligning that as much as possible in the delivery and led by the employer, you will be very close to something that's similar to what's being delivered. It will just be the way it's delivered and the manner it's assessed at the end, but the content could be very similar.
Yeah. Great, well thanks very much for that, and thank you also Doniya and Jason there for giving John a bit of thinking time there. You probably owe you a coffee afterwards. So going to a more sort of slightly technical question again from Catriona McCowie. Hopefully I'm saying that name correctly. How will the levy, will the levy come out of payroll on a monthly basis? And how do we get the 15,000 allowance if our pay bill is over 3 million? So I think the question is kind of around the thresholds. Jason, you want to start on that one?
Yeah, it'll be taken monthly. The document I've read talks about either the 19th or the 22nd of the month, depending on when you do your returns. So I guess at the moment, every company, their payroll team will do some kind of return to HMRC. And when they do that, so in May, when they do it, it will also at that point take 0.5% of what your April pay bill was and pay that into your digital account. With regards to your allowance, that allowance, and a little bit like, I guess the only way to describe this, and the way I normally do this with an employer, would be talk about your individual sort of tax allowance almost. Every month when you receive your own personal salary, there's the first portion of it that you don't actually get taxed on. And in reality, it's the same. So that £15,000, effectively £1,250 every month. The first £1,250 you would have paid in, effectively you won't pay in. That'll be your allowance. So if you were due to pay in £5,000 this month, clearly the first 1,250 you wouldn't. You'd pay 3,750 into the pot.
Great. And John, I think
Yeah,
just
that's
got a point there. Yeah, Doniya,
Straightforward, yeah.
Okay. So the next question is from Karen Hayes, and how is learning something materially different quantified, and who approves what is allowed? Maybe John, do you want to just...
So I think Jason was referring to earlier, so if someone's, let's say they've done a degree as in physics or in geography or history, and they come into a role that is networking, or I'll even say data analytics or those types of roles, it's a significant difference in skills, and therefore that would demonstrate the difference in a previous qualification to what they're going to do in the training. Where you might get some situations is now that a lot, or not a lot, but much of the training is aligned to professional qualifications. So you might have someone who's done part of an AAT in finance, and where would that cross over if you came into that type of role? But in terms of if it's badged as a degree or a previous qualification in geography, if that's compared against an IT, it will be a significant difference in what they do.
I think we're expecting the Institute for Apprenticeships to be the determining body, because in her question she said who will be the ones determining this.
What do we know about the Institute of Apprenticeships?
It seems like quite a mystical institute at the moment. not a lot. We know that there was a shadow CEO who is no longer in place. We know that it's going to be employer-led. We know that there's going to be checks and balances on this institute. But that is what we seem to know at the moment, unless I've been not told something.
No, they have advertised for the positions of people who have applied for those posts, you're right. They are looking to have that in place by April next year, fully up and running. The roles and responsibilities of that haven't been fully determined of what they will do. And again, in this situation, it would be that, I mean, my understanding is that if we as a provider would have to apply or go to that organisation or the SFA or whoever they deem responsible to say, this is someone who's got this previous qualification, we would like, or we think they're eligible to do this. There will be those checks and balances, you're right. But whether that sits within the Institute of Apprenticeships or whether that's down at SFA level, no one knows at this current time.
We've been, urging government to provide a lot more clarity on the makeup and the exact roles and responsibilities of the Institute for Apprenticeships, as well as what their relationship with the SFA will be, what their relationship with the DFE will be, and whether or not they'll have any relationship with the new Department for Business. So just so that employers can get a better understanding of the scope of the new institute and what we can expect in April 2017.
And I think that's a really important point for all of our audience to know that there are trade bodies like techUK who are taking and actually canvassing opinion of members to then try and collect those up and lobby to the government to impact upon the final way this is implemented.
I think the other thing, Tim, is, again, Jason mentioned it earlier, but we know from this consultation, this document that's coming out, there will be another document at the end of the year where we're hoping some of that more the detail will be put into that in each of these areas where there's simple statements at the moment, that will be based on this feedback, it will be based on the thought process they've got, what comes out of the Institute of Apprenticeships, but that will give more detail in this next document that they're due to release.
Great. I'm just conscious now that we're coming up to time. What I'm going to do is just quickly have a scan through the questions and see whether there's any very quick one-line answer questions we can give. And then I'm going to ask each of our panellists to go through and give us a final wrapping up sentence. So I think we've covered off some of these. Pam Shadbolt has asked a question about the threshold, which I think has been answered. Kieran has asked whether the presentation will be shared and circulated. Yes, the presentation and the webinar, all the video, will be circulated to everybody who's registered for this event, so you'll be able to see that afterwards. is the levy applicable for all types of apprenticeships, engineering, accountancy, etc.? I mean, I think yes, it is. Yeah, that's a nice easy one. If an apprenticeship leaves the organisation midway, would the employer be expected to pay for the whole apprenticeship scheme? Quick answer? No. Okay, there we go. Great, this is working really well. My business has a head office in England for Society of Scotland. Would the devolved nations have an impact on this thing? I think we've got that one off. But if there's regional offices, does that add a level of complexity?
It does.
Remember, it's the postcode of the employee. So if you want to be an apprentice, then your postcode will determine whether you go under the English system, the Scottish system, or the Welsh system, the postcode of your workplace.
But presumably for an employee, it would be where their payslip, the address which the tax office is for their payslip.
Yeah, it says the actual guidance talks about HMRC knowing the addresses of each of the employees, their workplace, and therefore they'll calculate it from that.
Excellent. Great. So now I'm just going to ask our panellists to just give one wrapping up statement. Hopefully they've been mulling on that whilst I've been blabbering on. So we'll start first with Doniya.
I would encourage every employer to take the survey that has been put out by the DFE on the B's website. Very complicated. Just make sure that your voice is heard. What are your opinions on the funding bans? What are your concerns on the devolved administration issue? And just ensure that you are feeding in, because that data will be very helpful. And if you're a techUK member listening, please make sure that you're feeding into me as well, so I can better shape my response on behalf of the techUK membership. And just keep the dialogue open, because even though there's been a lot that's been happening very quickly, there's still a lot to be determined.
Great, thank you very much. And John, over to you.
I think mine is don't panic. Even from the fact that you might not be in a position to start May next year on the first apprenticeships, bear in mind that that voucher has a lifetime of 18 months and that there is still enough time to put the right training in place, the relevant requirements you need, and also if that standard doesn't exist off the list that we're going to send out, there's still opportunity for you to develop something that's relevant to the organisation.
Great, thank you, John. And Jason, final word from you.
Make sure you're talking internally. This conversation needs to be happening at your board level, at your senior management level. You need to be thinking about your current training that you deliver, the current skills gaps that you have, and how do you really make the most of this. A lot of L&D people I'm talking to are saying this is a great opportunity actually to almost have this funding ring fence, for want of a better word, to actually do the things that they've perhaps been wanting to do for a little while. So a great opportunity to talk internally, but also reach out to organisations like ours where you need that extra guidance and help, because we're here to provide that.